A cold mist hangs over a narrow French field, and the mud clings to your boots like it wants to keep you here forever. You can hear horses snorting somewhere in the gray, the creak of leather, the soft thrum of bowstrings being tested in the dark. If you stepped into this morning as an ordinary soldier, you probably wouldn't survive, not because the weapons are magical, but because every mistake sinks into the earth and stays there. It is the 25th of October 1415, the Battle of Agincourt, an officially recognized hinge point in the 100 Years' War, and both sides feel history tightening around their throats. Henry V's English army is outnumbered, tired from the Harfleur campaign, and short on food. Yet it functions like a pared-down machine, men at arms in the center, archers on the wings, each group knowing its job and its spacing. The strength here is not just courage but system. English longbowmen are not lone hunters, they are a formation. Arm, trained to shoot in volleys, to listen for commands, and to move as a body when told. Their weakness is obvious: to light armor, vulnerability if the line collapses, and an exhausting weapon that demands years of practice rather than weeks of drilling. Across the field, the French host looks like a rolling city of steel, nobles, knights, and men-at-arms stacked in successive battles or divisions, expecting to crush a smaller foe by mass. Compared to many contemporary armies, say, the looser levies of some Iberian campaigns or the largely cavalry-centric forces of Eastern Europe, France brings superb heavy shock power, but also a rigid social hierarchy that can slow decision-making when minutes matter. Knights must master not only riding and lance work, but also the art of advancing shoulder to shoulder on foot, keeping a straight front under missile fire. A strange side fact: the night before, English archers are said to have sharpened their arrowheads by the thousands and slept with bows under their cloaks, to keep strings dry. Tiny logistics that decide giant outcomes. Even today, there is academic debate over whether the English chose this ground intentionally or were forced into it, but everyone agrees on one thing: the field will reward control and punish chaos. The fog thins, and with it comes a clearer view of what Henry's army actually is: not a desperate mob, but a longbow factory arranged for one brutal morning. English archers are grouped by retinues under captains, standing in ordered ranks on the flanks, each man with a sheaf of arrows planted in the mud at his feet for quick reach in battle. This formation functions like a repeating engine. The front line shoots high, the next line angles slightly lower, and volleys roll forward in waves, an early kind of fire discipline that many medieval forces never mastered. At Agincourt, that rhythm matters as much as raw strength. The longbow's strength is simple and terrifying: range, penetration at medium distance, and a rate of fire that can overwhelm armor by volume even when single shots fail. A practiced archer can loose perhaps 10 arrows a minute in short bursts, though there is academic debate about the exact sustained rate under combat stress, especially in wet conditions. The weakness is equally clear. Longbows demand a lifetime of training. Warbows of 150 pounds draw weight don't forgive sloppy posture, and archers are lightly protected if the enemy reaches them. So the system insists on spacing, mutual support, and commanders who keep them behind a shield of men-at-arms and fortifications. Skills are not only physical but cognitive. An archer must judge distance through mist, adjust for wind, and still keep cadence with shouted orders or horn signals. He must resist the instinct to shoot early for personal glory, because formation fire is more lethal than individual aim. Compared to crossbow units in Italian city-states who could be trained faster and carried pavises, but fired more slowly, the English longbowmen are a high-skill, high-output arm that rewards national investment over many years. A lesser-known side detail: some archers at Agincourt carried mallets not as afterthoughts, but as standard kit, used to drive stakes and also to repair or reseat bow staves that warped in damp air. It's a reminder that the army's power is logistical and communal, not romantic. When the first French lines begin to move, they are stepping into a storm that has been organized, timed, and socially engineered long before the battle ever began. Before the French advance fully gathers its courage, the English front is already shaping the battlefield into a trap. In front of each archer's position, angled outward like the teeth of a saw. Sharpened wooden stakes are hammered into the mud. This is not improvisation. It's doctrine refined through earlier campaigns in Wales and against Scottish cavalry, and now applied on French soil with grim precision. At Agincourt, these stakes create kill zones, corridors where horses hesitate, where armored men funnel, and where arrows find predictable lanes. The defensive line functions in layers. Stakes stop or slow a cavalry rush, forcing any mounted charge to break formation or veer into softer ground. Behind them, archers can keep shooting without being instantly ridden down, while men-at-arms hold the center ready to absorb whatever mass makes it through. The strength of this system is control at a distance. It turns the enemy's speed into stuttering, and their width into a narrow crush. The weakness is that stakes are static. If the English line must retreat or shift abruptly, those same barriers can become a hindrance, and archers caught outside them are exposed. Using stakes well demands teamwork. Soldiers must plant them at uniform depth and spacing, align them with the intended fields of fire, and remember their own entry and exit lanes so the line doesn't trip over itself. In a sudden counter move, it's a quiet kind of skill engineering. Under pressure, compared to other anti-cavalry methods of the era, such as Flemish pike squares at Courtrai or the later Swiss hedgehog formations, the English stake wall is lighter, quicker to deploy, and designed to complement missile fire rather than replace it with sheer bristling steel. A strange side fact that slips between chronicles. Some accounts say Henry ordered the archers to step forward and replant stakes after the initial volleys, nudging the lethal fence closer as the French trudged in an audacious bit of battlefield ergonomics. There is academic debate over how uniformly this was executed across the line, but the broader point stands. The stakes are not a footnote. They are the physical expression of English intent. You will come to us on our terms, and in the sucking mud of Agincourt, that intent is already winning space before sword meets steel. Now the French finally commit, and the field reveals its cruel logic. Their plan, at least on paper, is orthodox for the age: cavalry to sweep aside the archers, then dense lines of men-at-arms to grind through the English center, with fresh divisions behind to finish the job. It is an officially recognized moment in military history, because what happens next shows the difference between having formation theory and having formation control. The first mounted elements surge but meet the stake line and the arrow storm. At the same time, horses balk, riders bunch, and a charge meant to be a wide, clean blade becomes a blunt wedge that can't find room to breathe. Behind them, French men-at-arms advance on foot in tightly packed ranks, helmets low, shields close, expecting mass to be their strength. In another terrain dry, open ground like many late medieval set-piece battles, this kind of push could work. Here, the mud steals momentum with every step. Armor that is a strength in shock combat becomes a weakness in a slog. Men compress forward, the rear ranks literally pushing the front into a thicker and thicker knot. The skills these soldiers need are the hardest kind in medieval warfare. Maintaining spacing when you're exhausted, keeping alignment when you can't see your own feet, and obeying officers even as arrows rattle around you. But the French system is socially top-heavy. Too many nobles outrank the people giving practical orders, and in the crush, signals don't travel. Compared to English combined arms, or the later Burgundian ordnance approach with clearer command layers, French control here is brittle. A lesser-known side fact from some chronicles in the press: men sometimes had to lift fallen comrades just to keep moving, not out of mercy, but because a body in the wrong place could jam the whole advance. That detail underlines the academic debate still running today. Was Agincourt decided mainly by English firepower, or by French over-concentration and terrain blindness? Either way, their formations don't just slow, they unravel into a single massive target. And the Longbows keep time like a metronome for disaster. As the French front bunches into that sweating, stumbling mass, Henry's line does something that looks almost boring from a distance, and that's exactly why it works. Command in the English army is tight and surprisingly modern in spirit. Retinue captains relay orders down small, familiar groups. Banners and trumpet calls provide simple, repeatable signals. and the whole formation is built around doing a few actions very well instead of many actions half well. When the moment comes, the men-at-arms in the center step forward in a controlled surge, not a wild chase, keeping their frontage aligned with the archers' fields of fire. This is perfect formation control in a medieval register, disciplined. Micro-movements that preserve the plan. The army functions as combined arms. Even if nobody in 1415 uses that phrase, archers are not passive shooters. Once the French are sufficiently slowed, many slip around the stake ends and begin close support, striking at exposed flanks, dragging men down, then flowing back to avoid being pinned. Their strength here is adaptability, a willingness to switch roles without breaking overall cohesion. The weakness is risk. If too many archers commit forward too early, the wings thin and the line can be turned. So the skill required is judgment on the edge of chaos, knowing when to leave the bow, when to return to it, and how to move without crossing friendly lanes. It's drill plus battlefield sense. Compared to other armies of the time, this is unusual. Many French and Burgundian forces rely on noble initiative, expecting valor to substitute for timing. English practice, shaped by decades of war and the legal expectation that archery be trained by commoners, creates a wider base of soldiers who understand formation obedience. There's academic debate about how much Henry personally directed these shifts versus his captains acting autonomously, but either interpretation points to the same reality. The English system is resilient because authority is distributed in usable chunks. A strange side note tucked into pay records and later stories. Some archers are reportedly repositioned a few paces at a time to keep angles clear as the French leap forward, like stagehands adjusting lights mid-performance. That tiny choreography, multiplied across the line, turns the battlefield into a controlled machine, one that keeps functioning, even when everything in front of it stops making sense. The fight dwindles not with a single cinematic stroke, but with a slow, exhausted collapse of French momentum. By early afternoon, the field is a maze of stalled bodies, broken lines, and nobles trying to reform units that no longer have space to exist. The English, still functioning in their original layout, center firm, wings elastic, begin to reclaim the ground between the stake line and the crushed French battle. This is the immediate outcome Agincourt is remembered for, a smaller army holding formation long enough for the bigger one to defeat itself. Politically, the aftermath ripples outward fast. Henry V's victory shatters French confidence, strengthens English bargaining power, and sets the stage for the Treaty of Troyes a few years later, where Henry is recognized as heir to the French throne, at least on paper, and only briefly. Historians argue over whether Agincourt truly proved Longbows superior to knights, or whether it was a one-off convergence of terrain, fatigue, and French command failure. The side you take doesn't change the fact that the English army demonstrated an operational truth. Weapons matter most when they are embedded in a formation that can use them at the right time. Strengths and weaknesses become clearer once the shearing fades. The English method excels at defensive battle on chosen ground, where longbows and obstacles can dictate tempo. Its weakness is strategic inflexibility on open, dry fields. Without preparation time, the same light archers could be swept aside. The French, for all their prestige, show the fragility of massed heavy infantry when control breaks. Their strength in shock and social cohesion becomes weakness when those same bonds prevent rapid adaptation. A lesser-known detail from the loot lists: many English soldiers walked away with surprisingly mundane prizes, buckles, gloves, small silver bits, because the real treasure was buried under the mud and unreachable in the press. And yet the legend grows larger than the field itself, turning archers into national icons and stakes into symbols of cleverness against odds. Compared to later English victories that relied more on artillery, Agincourt remains a masterclass in controlling space with simple tools. Conclusion and effectiveness assessment: Agincourt endures because it's not just a story about a weapon, it's a story about a system. The longbow was lethal, but only in the hands of men trained to shoot together, to wait for signals, to manage fatigue, and to accept that their individual aim mattered less than the rhythm of their line. The stakes were cheap wood, but placed. With tactical intent, they rewrote the geometry of the battlefield, forcing French cavalry and infantry into predictable lanes. And the English men-at-arms were not superhuman. They were simply held in reserve and advanced at a moment when the enemy was already half defeated. By terrain and fire. So how effective was this approach? In the specific conditions of Agincourt, it was close to optimal. The English formation created layered problems the French couldn't solve simultaneously. Arrows punished the advance, stakes punished speed, mud punished mass, and disciplined countersteps punished exhaustion. Each piece covered the vulnerabilities of the others. That's why even today, scholars debate whether the longbow won the battle because separating bow from stakes, or stakes from mud, or mud from French command culture, misses how the parts interacted. The outcome was emergent, like a modern combined arms engagement scaled down to medieval tools. But the method had limits. It depended on time to prepare, a narrow field to compress the enemy, and an opponent committed to frontal pressure against a patient foe who refused the funnel, or on ground that allowed wide maneuver. The English would have struggled. The longbow's training burden also meant it was hard to replace quickly. Unlike crossbow or handgun formations that would rise later, Agincourt's real lesson is formation control under stress. When one army kept its shape and the other dissolved, the battlefield itself became a weapon. That's why the victory still feels inevitable once it starts. And why? Standing in that mud, you probably wouldn't survive unless you were part of the system.